All right. So today we're going to talk about how to build a customer experience foundation, right? How do you take an organization and pivot it to be truly customer first? I'm Anurag. I work in marketing here at Votacall. This is Andy. He's our COO. Nice wave. It's very personal.
Thank you.
We got Dan, our director of solutions slash producer slash video guy in the back. So shout out Dan.
What's up, Dan?
Hey, bud.
So before we get into it, right, let's talk about the agenda. So what we've identified are three main pillars or steps that an organization needs to take, three boxes you need to check to become truly CX focused, right? The first is to build a value system. And what that means is obviously take best practices, but then also look for gaps within your industry and say, okay, these are where our competitors are falling short, whether it's managing sales expectations, whether it's on the support end, and let's take those and make those our strengths and differentiators. The second one is promoting that value system. So once you have it established, how do you make it an organizational mantra? How do you get everybody to buy into it and then execute based on it? And then the third is the hire, right? How do you find your ideal customer experience focused employee? Beyond looking at what's on somebody's resume, qualifications, how can you tell whether they're actually going to truly buy into what you're trying to do and then be able to execute accordingly? Anything you want to mention before we jump into it?
So I would say just a prelude to that list is the fact that you need to get top-down buy-in from everyone at your organization. So for me, it was making sure that my directors were fully on board and understood.
Your department heads, basically.
Department heads, exactly. They understood the mission so they could pass that messaging on down to the people that report to them. Because if they're not bought in, their people aren't bought in, nobody's bought in. It comes crumbling down.
Right, because why should you care if your boss doesn't?
Definitely,
right?
And it's a weak foundation, right? So you have to start and get everyone bought in. So at the end, it's a real top-down buy-in across the organization. So that's the one thing I would say prior to building that foundation.
Sure. All right, so let's get into it, right? Building a value system, as I mentioned, in the intro here, really what we're talking about is finding the gaps, right? So different industries, different businesses, their competitors are going to fall short in different places as it pertains to addressing customer needs, right? So how do you find those and then ultimately build principles off of them that everybody kind of lives by and works by? So with that, I guess I'll flip it over to you because you made this change or transformation at Votacall, our company, 4 or 5 years ago?
A little bit more than that, about 6, 7, would you say, Dan?
Say at least.
At least.
You guys
we'll
are
call
old.
it 7. I'm old. I'm a fossil. Anyway.
It's not fun when you agree with me, but
Yeah.
So where did you start, right? Where did
So being in the industry now 20 years, at the time, we'll call it 15 years, I had a lot of exposure to bad experiences, customers who had other organizations that gave feedback about poor experiences. And I started noticing a trend that people got used to these mediocre experiences. And
what's an example of that?
So an example is the finger pointing is the big one that many customers reference. When there's a problem, they were sick and tired of the finger pointing.
Support teams finger pointing.
Support teams or overall company. It's not our fault. It's their fault. Call your XYZ provider. It's just not good enough.
Yeah.
People need, in our business, it's a phone to a lot of these people, right? And they just need it to work.
Right.
And when there is a problem, they need to know where to go, and they need to be confident that they're going to be handled.
Yeah, what could be more frustrating than a phone not working?
Brutal.
Like, it's been around forever.
Been around forever. They have it at home. It works 100% of the time at home. Their kids can use the phone at home. But at work, if there's a problem, it just doesn't make sense, and I totally get it. But they got used to this mediocre experience. So I quickly saw that was a space, customer experience, that we could really make a big impact in. It's about investing in the human being in your organization, empowering them, and in doing so, not only creating a great culture, a happy culture, but a happy customer base. So what could be better than that?
Yeah, and it's interesting that you frame it that way too, because like in our industry, obviously support is where it fell off, right? Even to this day, I'm a residential customer of larger providers, and nobody likes calling those companies, right? If you have an internet outage,
Who's that?
I don't want to name anybody by name.
All right. Let me see if I can trip you up.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that every industry suffers from the same issue, right?
Absolutely not.
Your support could always be better, but maybe in your industry, it's that sales doesn't do a good job of setting expectations. So being hyper transparent throughout that process, fulfillment even, right? Like establishing a timeline, sticking to it. So I like that you framed it that way, because it's not to say that like, hey, here's the one thing that you have to do or the one area you have to focus on. It really is like a true diagnosis of kind of what's going wrong elsewhere. All right, so my next question, I guess might sound like an obvious one, right? But like on paper, I understand why it's important to have a value system and to try to unify people underneath it. How do you know when it's working, right? Like what's the tangible advantage that you started seeing once you started really focusing on these types of initiatives? Like at what point were you like, okay, this is catching on and this makes sense now?
So there's a couple things. So obviously you want to be able to measure customer experience, but that's for another time, which that's a whole webinar series unto itself, right?
Is that a plug?
It's a little bit of a plug.
Oh,
Is that shameless?
No, that was good.
That was good.
That was
Thanks.
good. I
All
like
right.
what you did.
But the other thing is just the general culture. When you see a change in people, right? Because look, if you break customer experience down, it's literally people connecting with people. And when you start seeing a change in your own culture and your own people, their level of happiness, you know you've started to move the needle. And then you start hearing from your customers. Once you start hearing from your customers about, so-and-so employee did X, Y, and Z above and beyond the call of duty. We've never had any other provider handle us like that. You start getting that feedback.
Those are the best emails.
Those are the best.
Yeah. We had one of those, yesterday?
One of those yesterday. I mean, we got to shoot for those on a daily basis.
Yeah.
There was a time when I would challenge people to get good customer feedback, and I was told we can't. And I said, impossible. It's impossible that you can't. You have to change the way you're engaging clients. And if you do, you will get that positive feedback. I mean, that's a fact.
I like that because it's like, I think we get very obsessed with metrics now, right? It's like, especially as it pertains to customer experience. All right, what's our churn look like, right? What's our retention rate? What's our net promoter score? Which is important, and you should be tracking stuff. But ultimately, you're not going to be able to track all those numbers accurately right away. So the ability to like have those benchmarks and those little steps where somebody sends you that email that says, hey, that guy went above and beyond for me and I really appreciate it. That kind of lets you know that you're on the right track, I feel like.
Absolutely. I mean, this is
you're never too mature for that either. But.
This is about a connection. It's about an emotional feeling. And you're absolutely right. Like metrics are important. I like data. I love data.
You do.
I love metrics. But at the same time, you can't get lost in those. It's not about how the speed of resolution. It's how the customer feels at the end of a ticket, a support ticket or a resolution. That to me is more important than how quickly.
The last thing you want is for somebody to shoot for speed and then the customer feels like they just rushed through.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Which to me that defines. So the number one value in our value system is the customer experience is the only metric. And that's just to simply say, above all else, I don't care about anything else other than, is the customer happy?
Yeah, it sounds simple. Sounds simpler than it really is to execute on, probably.
No, it's definitely, that's the key. There's a lot of wide open space, right, in customer experience. It's so gray. It means different things to different people. So what you're doing when you're establishing this value system is you are creating these guardrails that people can work within, and you're slowly taking that wide open space and you're defining it over time. If you can do that, that's when people start feeling empowered to make decisions, good decisions, because it all relates back to the same mantra.
Yeah, it's not strict rules. It's basically like, hey, here's our principles. Now go make decisions based off of that.
You cannot, you can call them rules, but they can't actually be defined hard and fast rules. Right. They have to allow someone to make good human decisions based on that value system. Otherwise, what's the point in having a value system? What's the point in having good people working for you?
Right.
It means nothing.
It's interesting because, so like I interviewed here, close to three years ago. So this change had already kind of been fully flushed out. And I remember in my interview with you, I, confession, didn't really understand the technology or like what was going on. I knew we were doing business
prepare.
phone system. I didn't prepare.
Well, you're lucky because I wasn't looking for that.
That's true.
All right.
But with that said, right, like the one thing that I did notice right away is like, oh, Votacall values. There's these 10 things written on the wall. We don't play support tennis, right? That in my head right
That's
away,
my
I was
favorite.
like, oh, that means that they're not,
Yep.
passing the buck on people. And ultimately, it was like, okay, so this is what they care about getting buy-in on first, right? The technology can be taught, the applications of it can be taught. That part can't. All right, so speaking of value systems, right? I found one from a company that you really like, Zappos.
Love Zappos.
For those who don't know, Zappos, online shoe retailer. They do clothing now, too, right? Outside of just footwear.
They do, but to me, they're the Amazon of shoes. In
The
fact,
Amazon of
the
shoes.
fun fact is I used to go around, and Dan can attest, that I want to be the Zappos of telecom. I don't know.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Wow. That's...
Yeah. I mean, it sounds a little strange,
It does.
but from a
Shoes and phones.
customer experience standpoint, I think it makes total sense. That or the Disney. Disney's got great customer experience. Great
No
example.
question.
Okay, but back to you.
Back to me. What was I talking about? Zappos.
Zappos.
So, they have what they call their 10 core values and oath of employment, right? Which is like a pretty, I think, intense way to put it, but the principle stands. I'm not going to read all 10 to you, but the fact that they're documented and that every employee knows them when they walk in the door, I think is huge. And I think that that's something, to learn from. So just a couple of them, right? The first one, deliver wow through service, right? So to them, it basically means you don't hang up and have a support ticket closed or a service interaction and go, okay, great, done. You go, wow, like that was cool. They went out of their way. Returning something was just as easy as buying it.
Absolutely.
Novel concept there. The fourth is be adventurous, creative, and open-minded, right? So going back to your point about empowering people to just make decisions based on
decisions.
Right, exactly. It's not about following something to a T. It's about knowing where your guardrails are and being able to be autonomous within them. One that really stood out to me and that I drew some parallels with us is their eighth one, which is do more with less, right? So for those who don't know, Votacall, we're not some like 10,000 person organization with a support team staffed by hundreds of people. We're a 50-some-odd person company, and we're still able to address customers that are pretty large, right, verging on enterprise, and make sure that their experience is just as strong as the person that owns a small business that might be only 20 or 30 people. And I think a big reason for that is because everybody knows how to be autonomous within their guardrails, right? So it's not like we're following a script. It's not like, there's one standardized process for how to do anything. You hire people that are smart, that have aptitude in what they need to be doing, and that are problem solvers, that understand, what you're trying to do and can execute based on it.
Absolutely.
Actually, funny little tidbit about Zappos. I don't know if you knew this, but you can actually go to their headquarters in Vegas and do like a 3-day boot camp on customer experience, company culture, how to keep customers happy, outstanding experiences, that kind of stuff.
I mean, they were the originals. They were the original customer experience company. I mean, they inspired me, and they inspired a lot of the changes we made. I mean, they're a terrific company.
All right, so now you've established your value system, right?
Yes.
Now you have to get it to stick.
Yep.
That's the second point, promoting your value system. So you've taken the time to see where your competitors have fallen short. You've taken the time to take the pulse of your customers in the industry. Now you got to promote it based on the principles that you've created. So now what?
So you have to make it real, right? If it's not real, it's not going to work. I mean, customer experience is about being authentic and genuine, being human. Well, you have to make it real with your people first. If they don't buy into it, not going to deliver it.
So what's an example of that?
So an example is, like you said, you came in for an interview. The values, the simplest things, you put them up on the wall, right? That's your upfront agreement with everyone who walks through that door that this is how we're
and I'll bring
behave.
those up on the screen so you guys can see it too.
It's the best. That's one of the best tools we have when we put that up on that wall, because look, we're not perfect. So when the customer experience falls short, we have high standards. When it falls short, we used to be able to just walk in there and point, did you follow the Votacall values? Did you say this is in line with them? And they would have to honestly answer yes or no. We don't have to do that anymore.
Yeah, it's pretty ingrained.
It's pretty ingrained. But to your point, how do you then roll this out? And it's to make it real. It's getting it up on that wall and making it real through that upfront contract that everyone buys into. And then it's about promoting, constant promotion, daily basis promotion. It can't be a whimsical random every month some sort of blog or post about customer experience. It's got to be what you talk about with your people on a daily basis. You have to meet about it. You have to talk about great examples outside of your organization in your personal life. Bad examples of customer experience are just as important, because you want to learn from them how not to be. And I used to bring in ones from my personal life, bring in an interaction I may have with an at-home service provider. I'm not going to name any names or something of that nature, right? And I would explain, here was my experience. Was that good or bad? Is that something that is acceptable here? And you start getting people really bought into the difference.
Well, thinking about it constantly,
and it's black and white. It really becomes black and white. Either you make someone happy or you don't. That's what it comes down to. So you have to promote it via email, social, conversations on a daily basis.
So you're pretty repetitive with it.
So that is, I was getting to that. Thank you.
No,
I'm glad you brought it up, because I always say this to you, and I say it to everyone here, that if any leader who wants to get a new initiative off the ground, if you aren't being repetitive, I mean annoyingly redundant in some people's eyes, if you aren't
not my eyes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If you aren't constantly talking about it and being repetitive, it's not going to go anywhere. You might as well pack it in. The one and done mentality, just because I'm the boss and I say this, you do, that doesn't work. And it never has. You really have to be repetitive with your message and explain it in many different ways, give many different examples to truly get the buy-in. Otherwise, again, any of these things, if you're not all in, you're out. That's the way I view it. And customer experience is an all-in mantra.
Yeah, that's a great point. So, you've been repetitive, right? You've put stuff up on the wall. I think you mentioned this earlier, but I want to go back to it because I think it's worth mentioning, this idea of anytime you see an example, right? Not just stuff that you bring in from your own personal life, but I'm talking about internally, when there's a support interaction that goes well versus one that doesn't go so well or isn't on principle, right? Calling those instances out has to be pretty important, I would think.
Huge.
Yeah.
Huge. It's good for morale when it's good. And it's a great learning tool when it's not. Anybody, and honestly, you have to have a culture where it's not a culture of fear. It's a culture of transparency. So I tried to foster that early on, where when I made a mistake, customer experience related or otherwise, I would get up in front of everybody and let them know what the mistake was and what it caused.
Is this true, Dan? Can you confirm?
I can confirm.
You can?
Yeah, I mean, I would be very transparent. It was therapeutic talking about it in front of people, but it also was showing everyone that, look, I'm human, just like you. I make mistakes, just like you. So share your mistakes. Don't hide them. You hide them, you don't learn, and others.
It only gets worse.
It gets worse, but nobody grows, right? So establishing that culture is big, big, big in our business, and sharing the good. Every time something good happens, we should be promoting that and giving the thumbs up across the board, internally and externally, that our people are the best in the business at delivering customer experience.
Yeah, those are always the best emails, the best posts. When you hear this customer went out of their way to go say that Dan did a great job for them.
Absolutely.
Right?
And think about it. If you're selling a product or fulfilling a product, when you hear a colleague did an excellent job with implementation or in a support instance, and you're in sales, how confident do you feel selling this product? It just raised your own game because of someone else's actions. I mean, that is huge. Conversely, when you're hearing customers complaining about the customer experience, your confidence is done.
Totally. I mean, it's why I can feel confident in us even doing this webinar, right?
This is real and genuine.
Right.
Yep.
Okay. So let's talk about hiring.
Okay.
Right.
Yep.
I think that something that I think about when you talk about value systems, right? And this is a way of doing things, is how do you teach that to new people that are coming in? And I think before that, how do you even test for that? How do you tell whether somebody is going to be able to not only be bought in, but also execute appropriately based on those guardrails? So I would imagine the hiring process probably had to change from, let me just read down these bullet points on a resume to, okay, how does this person actually feel about customer experience and how to deliver it?
I mean, to me, a resume is just about useless.
Wow.
If
That makes me feel good. That
well,
I
if
spent
I'm
all
going to
that
be
time
brutally honest, I interviewed every technical person that came through that door. I am not technical at all.
Mm-hmm. To you, it just beeps and blinks.
To me, it's lights beeping and blinking, and it's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
And I envy the people who understand it. I don't.
Yeah.
So to see a resume, a technical resume with all sorts of certifications on it, and all sorts of background information, it means nothing. What means something is one's ability to communicate. So if I can have a good conversation with someone who is technical, if they can, at the end, I feel like I made a connection, they made a connection with me, and it's above and beyond what the job's about, but about the human. If they can turn on a dime in the conversation, meaning we're talking about the job, and then we get into more personal interest items and then back to the job. If they can maneuver around with me like that, that's someone we want.
Right.
That's number
That's who customers will want to talk to.
That is number one. And then number two is the aptitude. Now, I'm not there to judge aptitude, technical aptitude. That's
so you do basically
else.
a two-prong interview, right? Where it's like you're judging on the communication aspect, the can I have a conversation with this person? Do they make me feel good, right, when I'm talking to them? And then you bring in somebody like a Wally.
I'll bring in the
Jason
director.
Waldrop. Shout out Jason Waldrop, Director of Technology.
Awesome guy, super smart. Yeah, and I'll bring him in to assess, okay, what's this person's aptitude? Can they actually handle the technical aspects of this job?
Right, because otherwise it falls apart.
But I'm looking for good communicators first, aptitude a close second. And that is a departure from the standard sort of game plan that most companies go with. Let me grab the guy with the most certifications. Right?
When you might not even need 3 or 4 of them that you have.
Exactly. I mean, it doesn't matter to me.
Right.
What matters to me is that they can have a conversation about technical things, and I'm not frustrated when I'm having that conversation.
Yeah, they can make you understand it.
Because guess what? Most of the world is like me, where they don't understand technology. So you have to get someone in here who has the aptitude and the ability to communicate all of those technical specifications that are, quite frankly, pretty intimidating. That's a big piece of the customer experience, the ability to communicate. Now, I will say that you have to come up with your ideal candidate, right? You have to have sort of a list of things like communication skills and can shift with a conversation.
That's the takeaway, right?
That's a takeaway. But before all this, after you roll out this new initiative, you're promoting it, you have to also be very, very comfortable with the fact that you are going to be rebuilding your team. All right, that you are not going to keep everybody. You're going to lose people. And that's okay. I mean, that's okay. This isn't right for everybody, right? I'm not saying it is. If it's not right for you, that's okay. I'll give you a good recommendation if you worked hard and you can go find a job
if you're not interested in...
If you're not someone who's going to make a connection with a customer, that's okay. Well, take the time, find the job that is right for you.
More appropriate. But
here it's not going to work. So you have to get very, very comfortable with the fact you are going to lose people. You can't hold on for dear life.
Not everybody will buy in.
Not everyone will buy in. Not everyone will be able to buy in. And you have to be able to move on and establish that new set of guidelines of people coming in who will transform the experience and, in essence, help transform the existing population at your company's ability to deliver the experience.
Yeah. So I want to talk about something that you mentioned about the interview process, pivoting on a dime, changing conversation topics, right? Because, when I interviewed, not to keep harping on that, but I remember I walked in, sat down in an empty conference room, was there for a couple minutes. I don't know if you were trying to intimidate me or whatever.
A little.
Yeah. Eric Davis, who's our support manager, shout out Eric, came in, handed me a notepad and a pen and said, I want you to write down 5 things that you want to talk about today that have nothing to do with work or your qualifications.
Yep.
Is that done with everybody? Is that part of the process now? Or how did you arrive at something like that?
So that is done with everybody. And I tried a bunch of different techniques. And I didn't get a good feeling from many of them, if not all of them. And I decided, you know what? And in customer experience, oftentimes about just thinking logically, what am I trying to get out of this? I want to be able to have a conversation with someone. I want to be able to know that if I shift topics, they can shift with me. And
Yeah, because that's how support calls go.
Absolutely. And you millennials are so super prepared for interviews
Wow.
that I wanted to make sure that I wasn't getting fooled.
A millennial compliment from an
I don't know if
older
it's a compliment,
gentleman.
but they are very prepared. I mean, I was never prepared like this for interviews, but you guys are super
I
prepared.
feel like you like the millennials.
I love the millennials. I'm like the millennials' biggest fan.
You are. It's true.
Big champion. But anyway,
That wasn't out of character.
no. Anyway, my point was I wanted to make sure that I wasn't being wooed by someone who's over prepared. That
Right.
I was going to be able to be wooed by their ability to connect and me connect with them.
Yeah, it's not like, oh, I've looked up the top 10 interview questions and I'm
And
going to knock them out of the park.
And I don't know if this strategy, I don't know, I came up with this on my own. It may exist. I don't know if others use it, but to have someone write down 5 topics unrelated to the job and industry, it's measuring a couple things. I mean, one, everybody's thrown off at first because they're let alone in a room by themselves for a little bit. So I want to make sure they can keep cool under pressure. 2, now they have to think. And I want to see if they're thinking, what does he want to hear? Or what do I want to talk about? And I really want what I want to talk, meaning them, what the candidate wants to talk about. That's what I want on that paper. And then when I go in the room, I read the questions quickly, and then I hop right in. I get right into their questions, and I don't ask them in sequence. I pick my favorites out of the group.
Sure.
And I sprinkle in job-related questions so they see if they can pivot from personal and interest and hobbies to, all right, what do you know about our industry? Why do you want to be, why do you like support? Why do you like technology? Then back to their personal questions. And I feel like you start getting a real gauge for how well someone can communicate, connect, and are they never nervous Purvis, or do they get rattled pretty easy?
Yeah.
What was yours?
Mine, you know what? It was Star Wars.
Someone tipped him off that I like Star Wars.
No. I'm a big Star Wars fan.
You just opened the
No
door.
I was tipped off.
You went all Willy Wonka.
No,
I was tipped off that you like Star Wars. I remember this, right? Because you walked in and you looked at the pad and you were like, you like Star Wars? What's your favorite one? And I was like, Empire. And you were like, sick. And we talked about that for
I feel like you
20
said
minutes.
Phantom Menace, but we can move on from that.
Oh, wow.
That's...
And you hired?
Right?
That would have been a hard no.
This would be my first and last one.
That would have been a hard no.
I've just
if you
been
said
insulted
Phantom
on
Menace.
camera.
He's the one of 3 movies he's ever seen.
Yeah, that's fair. He hasn't seen Caddyshack.
I'm not. That's
guys.
true. That's true.
Yeah.
I'm not a big movie buff,
No.
but
That's it all.
so, I guess closing thought for me is there was a study done by London Business School, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this kind of goes back to your point about getting the buy-in and getting people happy initially, right? And I'll just read it to you. Employees that feel welcome to express their authentic selves at work exhibit higher levels of organizational commitment, individual performance, and a propensity to help others, right? So it pretty much lines up with what we've been talking about, which is if you can get somebody to break out of their shell and be authentic right away, as soon as the interview process, and then you encourage that once they come in, and then you give them sort of those principles that we outlined in those guardrails to be like, okay, you're autonomous within these, so, as long as you're fulfilling these, then go for it. Find creative solutions, do your thing. So, I guess there's next steps here, right? Because this webinar was about building the foundation. How do you actually make this an organizational commitment?
Yep.
From there, right, there's a lot of work that still needs to be done, right? How do you promote these types of behaviors? How do you create visibility around them? How do you measure them?
So it doesn't get stale?
And then ultimately, how do you adjust, right? How do you tell what's working and what's not? So, in our next webinar, we're going to be talking more about measuring stuff, right? How do you gamify customer experience? How do you incentivize people and basically assign numbers to it where they know what they're shooting for consistently? And that way it's less of that gray area that you talk about. And it's basically, did you make the customer happy or did you not? So that's what we got coming up next. I don't know if you have anything you want to mention before we wrap.
I would just say that, again, each one of these foundational pillars is required. You have to totally buy in 100% in order for this house,
you can't
CX
toe the
house,
line.
to go up and be strong. Otherwise, it's going to crumble down. And as far as the next steps, you absolutely have to be able to measure customer experience in the simplest way possible. read that data and spit that data out to your team so they know when they're doing a good job and when they're not, and what they can improve on. And you have to make it fun. So support can't feel like a drag. It
Right.
can't feel like the typical.
Because at the wrong place, it can be a drag. It's like a thankless gig sometimes.
Thankless gig. You're getting yelled at. Maybe people are talking pretty harsh to you. You got to find ways to make things fun, make things challenging, right? In a growth experience. It can't all be about getting pounded on in support. You have to find a way to make it fun, like a sales environment. Oftentimes can be fun with different spiffs and games and stats. Like find a way to make it like a sales role.
All right, so Andy, thanks for taking the time. Thanks to anybody that has watched this. We hope that you got some actionable stuff out of it, and we'll look forward to seeing you the next time.